It seems hard to believe that $250 million were stolen by the federal government and no one else knew about it in Minneapolis. That's one. Second, as I learned on Kaylee's show last weekend, some of this money has possibly ended up in the hands of terrorist groups in Somalia.
$250 million intended for starving children vanished into luxury cars and overseas accounts. 65 people stand convicted in one of the largest fraud schemes in American history. Now the convicted mastermind is sitting in a federal cell facing 100 years, pointing the finger at a sitting United States Congresswoman, whose net worth just inexplicably dropped by millions of dollars overnight.
Such great questions, because the money flow, Kaylee, indeed, it went even to Somaliland.
On May 19, 2026, Vice President JD Vance stands before the press and announces a massive escalation. The Department of Justice is actively investigating Representative Ilhan Omar, targeting alleged immigration and financial fraud. He drops this revelation exactly 1 week after a devastating jailhouse interview hits the New York Post. Inside a federal cell, Amy Bach, the convicted founder of the Minnesota nonprofit Feeding Our Future, awaits her fate. Prosecutors secured her conviction for conspiracy, bribery, and wire fraud in March of 2025. She now faces a century in federal prison, with her final sentencing scheduled for May 1st. From behind bars, the convicted mastermind makes a direct accusation against the Congresswoman. Bach states she struggles to believe Omar was completely unaware of a $250 million fraud operation running directly through her own district. It marks the exact moment the timeline of political protection begins to fracture. To see exactly where this trail of missing millions leads, hit subscribe now.
Of her 2024 financial disclosure, it went from an estimate between $6 and $30 million, way down somewhere between $18,000 and $95,000 when a lot of eyebrows were raised.
She quietly alters her official congressional filings, erasing massive amounts of personal wealth from the public record. According to the revised documents, an initial asset valuation ranging between $6 million and $30 million is slashed down to a maximum of $95,000, with a floor of just $18,000. The House Oversight Committee immediately flags the multi-million-dollar discrepancy. She releases a two-word public explanation through her office, calling the missing millions a simple accounting error. In the real world, a $30 million accounting error triggers immediate federal asset freezing and forensic audits. Yet her office provided no further documentation to explain the vanished assets. For weeks, federal agencies initiated no public investigations into the missing funds. Behind the scenes, federal investigators are finally digging into the paperwork excuse. This sudden Department of Justice scrutiny goes far beyond a simple clerical mistake. It traces directly back to a massive federal raid and a shadow network that was already moving millions in illicit funds years earlier. With a final sentencing date looming, a desperate fraudster is suddenly pointing a finger at a powerful politician. The ultimate question is not just why she chose to speak now, but what the sealed federal trial documents actually prove. Lawmakers demand Representative Ilhan Omar turn over all records and communications tied to the Feeding Our Future scandal. Inside the Minnesota State Capitol, she officially declines to respond to the legislative request and fails to appear before the Oversight Committee. A formal subpoena effort immediately begins, attempting to force the release of documents from her former staff members and connected organizations. Republican politicians push the vote to the legislative floor. By a margin of exactly 1 vote, the subpoena effort fails. A single political maneuver effectively seals the communications from public state-level review. They successfully block the local inquiry, but cannot erase the paper trail sitting in federal court. According to documents from the March 2025 trial, the Congresswoman is deeply embedded in the case files. Her name appears at least 6 times in official trial exhibits presented directly to a federal judge. Investigators map out a clear line between the massive fraud scheme and her inner circle. During the federal proceedings, a devastating breach occurs within the political operation. The political firewall begins to collapse when Guhad Hashi Sid, a former staff member for Omar, officially pleads guilty to a federal offense directly related to the stolen funds. He provides a direct link between the Congressional office and the criminal enterprise. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors present the financial records. Trial records expose multiple communications between Omar's staff and convicted fraudsters. They simultaneously operated as heavy financial donors to her political campaign. Throughout the operation, illicit money flowed into the pockets of the fraudsters, while legal campaign contributions flowed back to the politician. The blocked state subpoenas stand in direct contrast to the federal evidence already entered into the court record. Court records show the street-level operators facing federal prison time, while the political figures remain shielded from state subpoenas. The federal guilty plea forced investigators to examine exactly how the funds were extracted. $250 million vanished from federal vaults. The network exploited emergency pandemic regulations to bypass standard financial controls. During the height of the pandemic, the fraud scaled rapidly across the state. Operators submitted fraudulent invoices to the state treasury on a monthly basis. The criminal network bypassed government oversight protocols and extracted the funds undetected. Before the money could buy luxury real estate, the operators had to secure the federal contracts. $250 million required a massive legal loophole. They built a financial empire on the illusion of starving children. Inside the Department of Justice case files, the nonprofit known as Feeding Our Future operated as a highly coordinated criminal syndicate. 65 individuals faced federal charges in what became one of the largest pandemic fraud operations in American history. She orchestrated the entire illicit network from the top down. In March 2025, a federal jury convicted founder Amy Bach. Prosecutors secured guilty verdicts for conspiracy, bribery, and wire fraud. They mapped out a staggering logistical lie to extract the funds. Across the state of Minnesota, fraudsters claimed to distribute meals to thousands of children every single day. Small storefronts and unvetted distribution sites served as the primary fronts for the massive operation. It required zero proof of actual food delivery. On a monthly basis, the operators submitted fake invoices to the government, claiming to feed more children than actually lived in their respective districts. $250 million in federal reimbursements flowed directly into the syndicate. They ensured the stolen capital never reached hungry families. Behind the scenes, the network systematically laundered the money to fund a lavish criminal lifestyle. Luxury real estate, high-end vehicles, and overseas bank accounts rapidly absorbed the federal cash. They purchased commercial properties and waterfront homes, while the intended recipients received nothing. Following the initial federal raids, Representative Omar denied any involvement in the criminal enterprise. The Congresswoman publicly distanced her office from the catastrophic fallout, calling the theft reprehensible and demanding a formal explanation from Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. Beneath the public outrage, a continuous structural parallel exists between the politician and the convicted fraudsters. Both current financial disclosure anomalies and the historic fraud scheme relied entirely on millions of dollars moving through unverified paperwork. They exploited a system designed to accept documents at face value. Without a single physical inspection, the fake invoice operation siphoned $250 million from the Treasury. Federal oversight protocols completely failed to detect the massive hemorrhaging of funds. It leaves a critical question unanswered as the sentencing date approaches. Before the first arrest occurred, the network scaled to an impossible size. A fraud of this magnitude required a specific mechanism to bypass the strict government audits. In March 2020, Congress passed a piece of legislation known as the Meals Act. The sweeping legislative package was heavily promoted and championed by Representative Ilhan Omar. She pushed to aggressively loosen federal oversight rules, implementing specific regulatory waivers for child meal programs across the entire country. Prior to this bill, strict verification protocols and mandatory site visits prevented phantom organizations from touching government money. The new legislative guidelines completely erased those critical safety measures, creating a massive vulnerability. They allowed restaurants and unvetted sponsors to suddenly receive millions in federal funds, bypassing the physical inspections previously required by law. From her federal holding cell, Amy Bach recently revealed a direct connection to this specific legislative shift. The convicted mastermind claims her organization, Feeding Our Future, exchanged multiple emails directly with the office of the Congresswoman. This network specifically communicated about these exact oversight waivers, securing the structural blind spot required to scale the fraud. Because of these relaxed rules, the massive enterprise expanded rapidly, operating with zero on-the-ground verification. $250 million flowed outward, completely unprotected by basic government audits. The syndicate exploited this newly created vulnerability to maximum effect, extracting federal funds while claiming to feed non-existent children. At the exact same time, a second financial pipeline quietly opened up. The same individuals siphoning federal cash were simultaneously funneling campaign donations into the political operations of Ilhan Omar. They weaponized the legislative changes to extract taxpayer money, then routed a portion of it back to the political architecture that made the theft possible. During the height of the pandemic, this circular flow of dirty money remained completely hidden from public view. The continuous stream of illicit campaign contributions perfectly aligned with the massive, unchecked payouts from the weakened federal program. Law enforcement agencies eventually dismantled the street-level operation, but the foundational laws remained untouched. Without the Meals Act, a fake invoice operation of this staggering size would have triggered immediate federal alarms. The system was never broken by a sophisticated cyber attack or a complex financial hack. It functioned exactly as the newly rewritten rules legally allowed. With the guardrails intentionally removed, the mechanics of the crime became fully visible. The ultimate responsibility for this historic theft might not belong solely to the people who took the money. Amy Bach sits in a federal cell facing a century behind bars. Outside those prison walls, the lawmakers who authored the loopholes face zero indictments for the fraud itself. They secured total immunity from the massive theft. Federal prosecutors targeted the street-level operators who exploited the vulnerabilities, while leaving the lawmakers untouched. Official documents confirm that legally implemented waivers shielded these politicians from all federal charges. It allowed 65 restaurant owners, nonprofit directors, and mid-level managers to take the fall for the $250 million heist. These convict operators absorbed the full weight of the prosecution, effectively closing the case for the general public and sealing the records. Inside the Capitol, the political architecture remains fully shielded from scrutiny. A single committee vote recently blocked a formal subpoena effort from state lawmakers investigating the deep financial connections. It successfully sealed all internal communications, preventing any public review of the underlying network. At the exact same time, a massive financial smokescreen appeared in official congressional filings. Representative Omar drastically amended her financial disclosures, reducing a $30 million asset valuation down to just $18,000. She attributed the multi-million-dollar Vanishing Act to a simple accounting error. In any standard federal investigation, a disappearing $30 million fortune would trigger immediate asset freezes and synchronized federal raids. Federal agencies accepted the paperwork anomaly from the representative, while utilizing identical paperwork anomalies to lock away the street-level operators. It prosecuted the 2020 fraud based entirely on fabricated invoices, false and unverified documents. During the 2026 disclosure scandal, the exact same reliance on unverified paperwork shields the protected class from basic accountability. The convicted mastermind waits for her final sentencing date, holding the last pieces of insider testimony regarding the true flow of the stolen money. She is the final target for this massive federal prosecution. As the May 31st deadline rapidly approaches, one variable remains unresolved. Federal prosecutors must now decide if they will finally cross the political threshold or let the elite network walk away clean. On May 19, 2026, Vice President JD Vance publicly confirmed the active federal inquiry. The Department of Justice is currently examining Representative Omar for potential criminal violations. Though no formal indictments exist on the public record, he expanded the scope of the investigation far beyond the missing child nutrition funds. During a massive press conference, Vance referenced historical allegations of systemic immigration fraud, linking the illegal activity directly to the Congresswoman. CBS News immediately contacted federal prosecutors for an official statement regarding these explosive claims, demanding answers about the ongoing probe. They received absolute silence from the agency. In response to the growing national scandal, President Trump and Vice President Vance signed a sweeping executive order. The new mandate targets nationwide fraud networks, specifically citing the exact legislative loopholes that enabled the massive Minnesota heist. It signals a direct threat to the political donor class, which previously operated with total immunity from federal oversight. The human cost of the crime remains entirely unaddressed. $250 million, originally allocated for vulnerable children, vanished permanently into criminal enterprises, luxury real estate, and political campaigns. They will never recover the stolen taxpayer funds. On May 31st, Amy Bach will face a federal judge for her final sentencing hearing. A 100-year prison term will effectively silence the primary architect of the fraud, burying the insider testimonies forever. She will take the deepest secrets of the political protection network directly into a maximum security federal cell. $250 million disappeared through a perfectly legal legislative loophole. The mastermind takes the fall, while the political architects amend their financial disclosures and walk away completely untouched. They rely on the public to simply forget the details and move on. To track where the rest of this dirty money flows, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. The next investigation moves to a different city, where another massive federal cover-up shields a new syndicate of untouchable elites. It reveals a blueprint for systemic theft that is already operating in plain sight across the country. Without any real accountability at the top, what exactly stops the system from executing this exact same operation all over again?